So I have probably told you all this before, but I'm going to tell it to you again because at a certain point I just get repetitious. But that is that one of my favorite TV shows is a British show called Doctor Who. Anyone ever heard of that one before? Few of you all have heard that. If you don't know anything about it, it started about 60 years ago. It took a little bit of a break in the late 80s and the 90s, somewhere around then, and then has been back on and is still going strong now. And so it's getting ready to celebrate 60 years. And I've been watching it for, well, not quite that long, but I've been watching it for a while now. And where it goes is there's some things that it's known for. One is its main character named the Doctor. That's just how he's referred to. That's what everyone calls him. And the other is when it started, it's very low special effects budget. Like it was well, in fact, just take a look at the main villain in the original series of it looked an awful lot like a salt and pepper shaker with a plunger and a giant kitchen whisk for weapons. I mean, you look at some of the old ones. I mean, I think that's exactly what they were. It was just that was all the budget they had, and the Doctor is an alien, and his spaceship is this blue police call box. Now they got away with that because they said, well, it's bigger on the inside. So you walk in, if you're like an actor in the series, you walk in through this door and then you walk into it and then they cut to, you're actually on a whole other set and it's bigger on the inside and it works out really well, but it means they didn't have to figure out a whole bunch of stuff for that. If you don't know what a police call box is, it's like a telephone booth that was only used to call the police that they had in England. If you don't know what a telephone booth is, that was what we used to use back in the day when we weren't at home to make phone calls. You put in your nickels, your dimes, and your quarters. You step into this little box. The big thing was when I was a kid, and even before that, that's where Superman went to change into his outfit. Was he went into a telephone booth. That was kind of where that all comes from. But the premise of the show is that the Doctor and his friends that they call companions, they go on journeys. Sometimes it's through time and space, and sometimes it's way back to places like Victorian England or ancient Rome or other things like that. And then other times it's to galaxies far, far away. They just have all sorts of adventures and things they go on. And there is one of his companions that he had at one point in time. Her name was Donna Noble, and Donna had this great characteristic about her that she missed everything. She completely and totally oblivious to everything that was going on around her. And this was like when she came on, and it was like she had missed alien invasions, hospitals being transported to the moon. If you're a Doctor Who fan, then you have a healthy fear of just about everything. Forest trees, Santa Claus, Christmas trees, angel statues. I mean, there just is a whole catalog of things we're all just a little bit leery of because we've watched way too much TV. But she's missed all of that stuff, just completely oblivious. And when her family and friends try to tell her about this, she's like, nah, that didn't really happen. That's not how things work around here. And every time she would miss it, every time. Bless her heart, Donna Noble, she missed it all. Y'all ever know anyone like that? They just, through whatever happenstance, they happened to be in the wrong time, in the wrong place, and missed everything. And then they were really skeptical. You tried to tell them about something, and they're like, no, that's not how that goes. And the thing about it is, the more isolated an event is that happens, the more folks that you're going to find who are going to be skeptical about it because they didn't see it for themselves. We could take that TARDIS all the way back to the very beginning and take a large group of us back there, and we could watch when God says, "Let there be light," and bang, there was light. There's going to be someone, I almost guarantee it, who will have gone out for fish and chips, and they'll come back and they'll say, when did all this stuff get here? And they're like, no, God just spoke of the words. And they're like, no, we didn't. Like, there's always going to be that person, right? Someone who is always just going to miss things. Now, given that I'm a preacher and this is the second Sunday of Easter, the logical place for me to go after this would be to the story of Doubting Thomas, right? That, in fact, is even the lectionary for this morning. It is the story of Doubting Thomas, but I don't like to go there for that because Thomas was a special case in all of this. Thomas wasn't oblivious to the world around him. Thomas was hurting. Thomas was suffering. Thomas was dealing with things that he didn't know that he had to deal with. And so when he comes back and all the rest of the disciples say that he's risen and say that they've experienced him, he is speaking from his pain and from his anger and from the trauma that he has suffered and saying, I'm not going to believe it. And so it's why I love when we get into Thomas's story, keep in mind that there were other disciples that had doubted before this. His is just the most prominent story that we have about it. But but Thomas, when he comes back and Jesus appears the next time, that Jesus responds to him with compassion. These aren't angry words at Thomas saying, why don't you believe? This is Jesus saying, dude, I get it. You're hurting. Let me help you to overcome this because you are struggling, and rightfully so. But rather for this morning, I like going to the story of the walk to Emmaus. Because there's just this great switch that takes place in the middle of this as the story begins. Now the thing we have to keep in mind as we read the story is that the two disciples who are walking back to Emmaus don't know that Jesus is with them. So as we read their part of the story, we always have to read it with that in mind, that they don't know that Jesus is there with them, that he's risen from the dead. They just assume as they are walking back along their way that Don and Noble has come up there with him and is walking with them. Because he reaches up to him and says to him, what are you talking about as you walk along? First century version of, what's up, y'all? Or if you remember from a number of weeks ago, what's up, Buttercup? I mean, that's kind of what they... I'm sorry, I may have told you I would never say those words again. But they ask him this, and one of them looks at him, and their faces are downcast, and Cleopas replies to him, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who is unaware of the things that have taken place over the last few days? Like, seriously, dude, where have you been hiding? Out under a rock someplace? Under his breath, Jesus replies, no, back behind a tomb, but that stone's been rolled away now. So, Jesus didn't actually say that, but, in my head, that's what he says. They say, really, God, you missed this. So like, let us fill you in on what's been going on through all of this. And they go on to describe all of the things that have been happening. All of the events that have taken place over that last week. Filling in this guy who appears to be completely clueless to the world around him. They're making sure that he knows. But here's where the switch comes. And this is what's fun. Because they still don't know that it's Jesus, but he says back to them now. He replies to them, you foolish people, your dull minds keep you from believing all that the prophets talked about. Wasn't it necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and then enter into his glory? Then he interpreted for them the things written about himself and all the scriptures, starting with Moses and going through all the prophets. They don't know it's Jesus, but he basically says to them, well, y'all missed this the first time. Let me start this over from the beginning again. Let's see if you catch it the second time around. Let me explain this to you again. And now they're finding themselves on the other side of this. We thought as the story opened up that it was this other guy who was the clueless one who didn't know what was going on, but no, it's the disciples. They're the ones who are oblivious to the world around them that don't know what's going on. And so they listen to him. When they get back to Emmaus, they walk into their house. They invite him to come in to stay with them because it was getting dark. And they sit down at the table. Jesus takes the bread, he blesses it, and he breaks it. And in that moment, we're told they get it. They understand who it is that has been with them through this entire time. Who it is that's been telling them the story, that Jesus has been here with them. And their eyes are open, and you would think in that moment they would have great celebration. But no, that's when Jesus goes poof and disappears. Now they're okay with this, because they're just excited to know. They say to each other, well, weren't our hearts warmed by this? Didn't we feel something different? They had a John Wesley moment before John Wesley ever got here. Their hearts were strangely warmed by this encounter they had with Jesus that they didn't know was him. And they were excited for this. They were glad of this. They knew for a fact now that Jesus had risen. And so even though it was night, they got back on the road and walked back to Jerusalem so they could tell the rest of the disciples that what had happened. It was in the breaking of the bread that they knew Jesus was with them, but in a very new and different way than he had been before. What they were witnessing, they didn't know this at the time, but we can see this now. They were witnessing the start of a new creation. Something new was beginning. So let's put all of these things together. It's often said of folks that are oblivious to the world around them, it's like they wake up in a brand new world every day. Right? We've known those folks who are just like, man, sometimes it'd be really nice to be in their position. Other times you're like, no. The character of Donna Noble was a lot like that. Unknowingly, the disciples on the road to Emmaus were a lot like that. But also Jesus' followers, and the whole world really to that point, were in that same place. They didn't know that something new was starting. They didn't know that a new thing was beginning. There are stories all through Scripture of new creations that start. From the very beginning, the first days when God speaks the words into and speaks the world into existence, we can go to the story of Noah and the flood, the Tower of Babel. We can even say the Exodus out of Egypt. We can say when the Israelites enter into the Promised Land. We can even say that it's a new creation when they return from exile and they resettle in the Promised Land. The Bible is full of new creations. When things are new from that point going forward, they're different than they had been before, and life had changed irretrievably from that moment. And the culmination of this, though, is in the Gospels, specifically in the story of Easter, where the world is different from that point going forward. And a lot of folks were caught unaware by that. They didn't know that that was going to be a thing. And the thing about new creation stories is that they are always evident as such after the fact. In the moment, it's hard to know that's what's happening. And so at some point along the way, we're all Donna Noble, we're all those disciples on the road. We're all Peter when he went back to the tomb and saw that it was empty and all he saw was the linen cloth there. At some point we are all those folks that just aren't ready yet or don't know that things had changed. And that's okay. And that's okay to be in that place because Jesus knows that's how that goes. Remember, this was a very isolated event that had taken place in Jerusalem. It was going to take a while for that to begin to spread out from there, for others to come to know that things were different now. But Jesus himself sets the tone for how we begin to help others come to see that. Remember what he does. The first thing he does is that he walks with others. He joined them along the way. He didn't immediately start off by wanting to tell them and convert them and go, surprise guys, here I am. It's not how he started. He started just by walking with them and then hearing their story. Hearing the story as they understood it, as they know it to be, so that he could understand what they were experiencing. Because the way we tell stories tells us as much about ourselves as it does about anyone who's doing the writing or anyone who's involved in the stories. And so he hears their story, and then he tells the story. The story in a way that they could understand and they could hear. And so that they didn't know this, but they were being prepared during that whole journey for that moment when Jesus broke the bread and their eyes were opened. And that's what he did. He broke the bread. And in that moment, they knew his presence in a way that they had never known it before. It's the same thing that we do when we celebrate communion, is that when we break the bread, we know Christ's presence in a way that we have never known it before, that he is here with us. We don't always understand it, and that's okay. We don't have to know how it works to know that he is there in that moment, and know that he is present with us. This is who we can be. This is who I want us to be. The new creation is knowing that the new creation is knowing that Jesus doesn't stop with the Gospels, that we are still in the midst of it. That new creation is going on all through the book of Revelation, where we get the final new creation, a new heaven and a new earth that come down, but we haven't got there yet, so that means we're still in the middle of this new creation that Jesus has done now. That life can be different, it can be good, because he is here and present with us. Let us go this week and not be surprised at who shows up with us to walk along the way. And let us tell the story of this creation and the story of Easter with all those that we walk with. Let us help them to know that Jesus is with them, and as the occasion arises, let us sit down and break bread with them, whether it's a nice tasty loaf of bread, whether it's chips and salsa of Los Chimas, whether it is something else that that you have the opportunity to share with someone. But let us be those people that walk with others, that hear their stories, that through that we tell the story of this new creation that starts with Easter, break bread with one another. And through all of this, let us know that Jesus is present with us. Let us do all this and know all these things in Christ's name. Amen.